Okay, so when Sam Shamoun's not busy beating his ex-wife and getting restraining orders, he's bringing up already refuted arguments against the Quran. But I wanna draw attention to one of his live streams. He talks about the Infancy Gospel of Thomas and how the he thinks the Prophet Muhammad plagiarized off that gospel. Now, it is true that the Infancy Gospel of Thomas does have a particular story that's found in the Quran. That's true. I'm not denying that. It's about Jesus making clay birds. But according to this article, an account of Jesus as a boy is decoded from an ancient papyrus scrap from the Washington Post. It says in the headline, the 16-year-old manuscript that had sat unnoticed for decades at a German universities. Experts say it may be the oldest written document detailing Jesus' childhood. Now, I wanna draw attention to. Hang on, let me see if I can get it here. I wanna draw attention to what they. Okay, so if we read the article, it says it is believed, the relevant part is it is believed to have originally written in the second century AD. That makes the oldest exact copy of that particular gospel. So what this author of this article, let me see who the author of the article is. Kelsey Ablis. What Kelsey is saying is that according to researchers, New Testament scholarship or New Testament scholars are saying that this gospel was written in the second century AD, and that makes it the oldest exact copy of that particular gospel. So basically, this gospel originated in the second century. Uh, about 120 years after Jesus. So regardless, this is not a threat to the Quran, because the reason why is because if you read the Oxford Bible Commentary, page 1307, John Barton and John Mohedim say that there were oral stories of Jesus in the first century, and some of those stories could have been written down in the second and third centuries. Some Jesus stories in the apocryphal Gospels could be as early and historically viable as the New Testament stories of Jesus. In other words, there are saying what these scholars are saying who wrote the Oxford Bible Commentary, page 1000 on page 1307, are saying that some of the stories found in these New Testament apocryphal books are as historically true as the New Testament stories about Jesus. So just because these stories were written down in the second and third centuries doesn't mean that they originated in the second and third centuries. There could have been oral stories in the first century, as Christian scholars are admitting, and they could have been written down in the second and third century. So these stories could originate from the first century, according to Christian scholars, like the Oxford Bible Commentary, page 1307. I'll leave the description. I'll leave the reference in the description below. So this is not a threat to the validity of the Quran, because the Quran could be repeating a true story that the apocryphal gospel, the Infancy Gospel of Thomas, recorded. So there could be a true story in, the Infancy Gospel of Thomas, and the Quran is repeating that true story found in the Infancy Gospel of Thomas. So this is not a threat to the validity of the Quran, because the Quran could be repeating true stories found in these apocryphal Gospels. So this is not a major threat against the reliability of the Quran. The New Testament does the same thing. The New Testament quotes from 1 Enoch, et cetera, et cetera. So the New Testament quotes from the life of Adam and Eve and 1 Enoch, books you can't find in the Old Testament canon, that the canonical Old Testament that we have today. So this is not a threat against the reliability of the Quran. This is just a threat to Sam Shamoun's knowledge of biblical history, of New Testament scholarship, and common sense. But anyways, this is a fallacy that Sam Shamoun commits. He commits the genetic fallacy and the post ergo propter hoc fallacy. Genetic fallacy is attacking the source of the claim instead of the claim itself. Post ergo propter hoc fallacy is saying the thing before caused the thing after. So these are fallacious arguments that these critics keep bringing up against the Quran, because the Bible does the same thing too. The Bible copies off of, or quote, the Bible plagiarizes, or I'm sorry, the New Testament, 2 Peter and the book of Jude copy off 1 Enoch, and Paul copies or plagiarizes off the life of Adam and Eve. And the defense Christian scholars of what was said is that these Old Testament apocryphal books do have some true stories in them, and the writers of the New Testament are quoting true stories. Well, same thing. Why can't the same thing be said about the Quran? There could be there could be, Jesus making clay bird could be a true story, and the author of, the Quran is repeating a true miracle of Jesus that wasn't found in the canonical Gospels, but made it into the Infancy Gospel of Thomas for some reason, by oral lore or whatever. And if you read the Gospel of John, if you read the ending of the Gospel of John, it says in the ending of the Gospel of John that Jesus did many things which are not recorded in the New Testament, which are not recorded in the it says in the Gospel of John, chapter 21, verse 25, it says Jesus did many things as well. If every one of them were written down, I suppose that even the whole world would not have room for the books that would be written. So according to the Gospel of John, chapter 21, verse 25, Jesus did many miracles, and and these miracles were not written down in the New Testament, or at least in the Gospel of John. And according to the author of the Gospel of John, Jesus did so many miracles that the whole world would not have room for the books that would be written about these miracles. So Jesus did thousands of miracles according to the Gospel of John, and Jesus did so many miracles that all the pages and all the books of the world can't record all these miracles. So it's according to the Gospel of John, the ending of the Gospel of John, chapter 21, verse 25, Jesus did many things, and it's possible that the New Testament authors didn't record Jesus making clay birds for some reason. It made it into the infancy. It was a true story that made it into the Infancy Gospel of Thomas for whatever reason, by oral lore or whatever. And then the Quran is confirming, or the Quran is repeating, a true story found in these apocryphal New Testament in this apocryphal New Testament book. So this is not a threat to the validity of the Quran, because Christian scholars themselves are admitting that the New Testament, New Testament apocryphal works do have true stories about Jesus. That they could record true stories about Jesus. But anyways, this is not a threat to the validity of the Quran. I don't see it as a threat to the validity of the Quran. The only way it can be a threat against the Quran is if it's been, if Christian scholars are dismissing the whole thing as fictional, and the critics of Islam can prove that story was unearthed in the 6th century, and it was translated from Greek into Arabic, and it was circulating in Makkah and Medina. That's the only way that that it can be. It's a threat against the validity of the Quran. But since there's no evidence that this book was translated from Greek to Arabic, and there's no evidence that this book was available, or the oral lore of this book, the oral stories of this book were available in Arabic in Medina and Mecca in the 5th and 6th centuries, the time when the Prophet Muhammad's ministry was active, the critics, cannot prove that this story was circulating in Arabia in the 5th and 6th century in Arabic, translated from Greek, because there's no evidence that these books were translated, these apocryphal books that they say the Prophet Muhammad stole or plagiarized off of, were translated from Greek, Hebrew into Arabic in Mecca and Medina in the 5th century. There's no evidence for that. So they would have to prove that the Prophet Muhammad learned those stories, and those stories were unearthed in the 5th and 6th century, and somebody translated those stories from Greek to Arabic and was spreading those stories in Makkah and Medina. That's impossible to prove. There's no way, it's impossible to prove that these books were translated from their languages to Arabic, from their original written languages to Arabic, and they were unearthed or they were discovered in the 5th and 6th century. So it's impossible to prove that. So the critic would have to successfully prove it, and they can't prove it. But anyways, this is not a threat to the validity of the Quran, because, you know, there are true stories found in these books, and the Quran could be just repeating the true stories already found in these New Testament apocryphal books. According to even Christian scholars are admitting that there are true stories found in those New Testament apocryphal books. So the Quran is not. So this is not a threat against the validity of the Quran. This is just a inconsistent argument that David Wood and Sam Shamoun and others bring up to somehow invalidate the Quran. But that argument backfires against them, because Christian scholars are admitting that there are true stories found in these apocryphal works, and the New Testament does the same thing. 2 Peter and Jude copy of one Enoch, and Paul copies off the life of Adam and Eve. Again, Old Testament apocryphal books that are not found in the Old Testament canon that we have today. So the New Testament does the same thing. It repeats stories found in these Old Testament apocryphal books. But regardless, my point is, this is not a threat. This is not a threat to the validity of the Quran, because it's a fallacious argument. Christian scholars are admitting that there are true stories found in these apocryphal works, and the critic would have to prove that these stories were translated from Greek to Arabic in the 5th and 6th century, and they'll never be able to prove that beyond the reasonable doubt. So this is not a threat to the validity of the Quran or the divine origin claim of the Quran. Stay tuned, more videos coming up ahead.